All right, welcome back and good morning, everybody. I hope everybody slept well. I hope you had visions of Sophia. And today we are going to even get more intense. As Frank said in Donnie Darko, have you ever seen a portal? I hope you see some portals today. That's the goal. Open some portals, and the end of the portal is always the same. You're going to run into your higher self, your true self, and what your mission is on earth. So we shall open some portals and continue to break down these false realities. So as always, it is an honor to have my friend and collaborator, Mitch Horowitz, with us. Sorry, Mitch, I had planned to have the solid gold dancers around you today, but they canceled for some reason. So you're going to have to do it on your own. But as Three Dog Night said, I must let the show go on. Yes, that's my goal. Obscure 70s and 80s music references. That's my goal, to keep us all grounded. But I'll have more announcements as the day goes. We got our social tonight. At noon, Maja will give us a Sophianic experience, and other news will be coming as the day goes. So yeah, sit back, enjoy yourself, and let's open some portals. So Mitch, welcome, Mitch.
Thank you. Thank you, my man. Thank you. Thank you all so much. I wish I could have been here to see everybody's presentation yesterday, but my partner Jacqueline and I had a wedding to attend in upstate New York, and we were on a very beautiful, very muddy property, and then took an Uber to Albany, New York, and somehow made our connections to Chicago. So it's nothing short of miraculous that we were able to get here, and I'm very grateful to be here. I feel every time I visit this campus, every time this conference is on or other events are on, you can see that there is a reverberation from the original founding of Theosophy from 1875, the intention of which was to explore world metaphysical traditions without prejudice, without excessive categorization, and without barriers or boundaries. And already, just in the short time that we've all been here, I think we can see that playing out. And one can honor that founding intention of Theosophy, which has remained successful to this day. It's very meaningful for me to be able to speak to you this morning on the ideas of G.I. Gurdjieff, because I've never before given a public talk on the thought of Gurdjieff. I was part of a digital class that we did here at the Theosophical Society, and I think Stephen Pollack, who was also part of that class, is here. And I discussed Gurdjieff as one of 6 icons of esoterica, but I've never given a dedicated public talk on his ideas. And when Miguel approached me and told me about the theme of the conference, Sophia and living within a simulated world, I thought to myself, this would be a good time to talk about Gurdjieff's analysis of the human situation, because it comports with Gnosticism. It comports with, I think, the enduring human wish for gnosis, and it comports with the concerns of many everyday people who never even use terms like Gnosticism or gnosis. Because I really do believe in my heart that one point of view that unites men and women all across our culture, and arguably all across the world, is this notion that we are living in some sort of an ersatz reality. This isn't the real thing. We don't feel like the selves that we present to the world, and the experiences, the institutions that we function within are altogether the real thing. It seems like there's some other mechanics going on that can be profoundly confusing and confounding. And for some people, this discomfort, which I think is to be encouraged, this discomfort is sublimated by the social media experience, where somebody announces some political position or some point of view, including sometimes a very tame position or a very tame point of view, as we were just talking about, and they are greeted with this vituperative, traducing and insulting and sarcastic language. And for many people, that call it what you wish, that dopamine rush, Gurdjieff referred to it as experiencing enjoyment from impressions outside of ourselves, is sufficient, and they don't want to think about this discomfort. But lots of people do, and so much so that I think it has entered our popular culture, it has entered our entertainment, sometimes in ways that might not even be intentional. For example, I remember saying to my partner Jacqueline when we watched the Barbie movie, I felt the first 20 minutes of the Barbie movie was the greatest popularization of Gnosticism I'd ever seen. Everything is going just fine in Plastic Land, and then for whatever reason, the protagonist starts thinking about her own death, and everything starts unraveling. And what was remarkable to me about that movie is that it showed in China, it showed in Saudi Arabia, nations very different from ours, and you didn't see the Matrix and the Truman Show back in the day in China and Saudi, and people were able to relate to it. And you know, China is a society that's officially atheistic. You can't publish books there where you talk about soul or spirit. I know this from personal experience. My books have government censors came in and they took 40% out of one of my books in China. And Saudi, of course, has a very strict, very conservative religious environment. And yet people from both atheistic societies and from societies that are very dominated by conservative religious structures, they got it. They got it. Because if they didn't get it, they wouldn't have been attending the movie. There's a universal human feeling that something is not real. And the thing that I value very deeply about Gurdjieff's work is that he continually demands that the individual turn that gaze mercilessly upon him or herself. Because another aspect, I think, of our culture that puts us to sleep, and that Gurdjieff used to call our evil inner God of self-calming. One of the really corrupt aspects of human nature is that we seek to reassure ourselves. I seek to reassure myself, to calm myself down by pointing fingers outward. It's always somebody else. It's always, you know, these people or this person, or if only people could understand me, everything would be just fine. And Gurdjieff had a particular insistence that kind of self-calming, that looking for the problem somewhere else, was exactly the quality that put us to sleep to our nature. And in fact, Gurdjieff's analysis of the human situation, which is radical today as when he first brought it over 100 years ago, is that humanity is really, truly asleep. And that this is not metaphorical, that we are, yes, of course, we're animated. I tie my shoe, I will go get more coffee later, we'll hang out together tonight and talk. Sure, some of us will go to our jobs on Monday, whatever. Of course, we go through the paces of existence, but we are going through these paces in a state of literal sleep, somnambulance. I don't want to qualify that very much because I think that the danger also in approaching ideas like this is to always compare them to something else and say, oh, you know, it's like what Jung said, or it's like that. And Jacob Needleman, who died recently, who was a student of the Gurdjieff work, said to me once, it's not like anything. It's not like anything. And the notion of humanity's asleepness informs everything that we do, including the utter repetition of wars on this planet. Lessons are never learned. Lessons are never learned from humanity fighting wars. I recently wrote a new introduction to a novel that I'm sure many of you know, All Quiet on the Western Front, which is a blistering, heart-rending novel of the events of World War I, and we haven't learned a thing from it. I love the qualities of the book. I love the qualities that the author brought to the fore. The ethical content of the book is impeccable, but it does nothing. And we have to ask ourselves why? Why? Not because it's somebody else's fault, not because there's something wrong with somebody else. I want to very briefly try to encapsulate some of the cosmic view of Gurdjieff, much of which is explored in his book, Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, sometimes also known as All and Everything, Part 1. And Gurdjieff once remarked that everything he said should be taken 7 different ways. So you might hear his cosmic philosophy and say to yourself, well, gee, is that metaphor? Is that literally true? Is that psychological? Is that spirit? You know, I don't know that you necessarily need to torment yourself with it, but I would take it as, I would take it on its own terms. You know, I would just simply take it on its own terms. The cosmic philosophy on which this book begins teaches that when our solar system was first taking shape in an evolutionary way, a comet struck the Earth, and this comet broke off 2 pieces. One piece, the larger one, is our moon, and the other piece, a smaller piece, is a kind of mystery planet called Anulios. And it's small, and it has eluded detection by humanity. You might venture a comparison between that idea and some of the ideas that you'll find in the work of Zecharia Sitchin, who talks about Nibiru, or what is sometimes called a planet X. I'm not saying they're the same thing. It's just an interesting adjacency. And so when this comet knocks these 2 pieces off Earth, there's trouble in the solar system, because these 2 pieces could go flying off out of their orbits, which are not yet settled, crash into other planets, maybe populated planets. There could be mass casualties. So the being keepers, more or less, of the galaxy, and within Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, we humans live in a very populated universe, and we happen to be more or less on the shit end of the universe insofar as we are very, very distant from the great source of creation, what might be called nous in Hermeticism. Very, very distant. And so we're not in an advantageous position. And the beings who oversee the cosmic maintenance of this particular corner of the galaxy decide, well, look, the beings that are growing up on Earth, these humans, which Gurdjieff refers to as 3-brain beings, 3 brains because you have a physical center, you have an emotional center, you have an intellectual center, and all these things matter. So these 3-brain beings need to provide a kind of energy to these rogue bodies so that they don't go flying off and destroying things elsewhere in the galaxy. And there is a reciprocal maintenance that all beings have with the cosmos. And we humans, we 3-brain beings, have to provide a kind of vibration, a kind of energy that creates stability. Sometimes, in fact, probably most importantly, this vibration emerges from the experience of what Gurdjieff called a conscious suffering or conscious labors, that we owe debts, put it that way. We owe debts. We have everything that sustains life on this planet, and there is a requisite payback. And that requisite payback doesn't come in the form of, you know, conventional attitudes about service or this or that, which I think can be very easily perfumed and corrupted and almost always are. But it comes in the form of conscious labors and conscious suffering, an awareness that life is going to be a mixture of joy and tragedy. There are going to be events that greet us with relative euphoria, events that greet us with horror, and there is a job in acknowledging, sustaining, desisting from complaining, foolishness, evasion. I'm not doing I would say, a full justice to the term of conscious labors and conscious suffering, but suffice to say that our capacity to abide suffering, among other things, helps create a kind of vibration or substance that provides stability. And it occurred to the maintenance keepers of this portion of the galaxy that if human beings became aware that their purpose, despite all the wars, the struggling, the drama, the tragedies, if human beings became aware that their purpose was to keep the moon in its orbit, they would be so filled with despair, it would be so insulting to the ego, the vanity, that they would kill themselves. So a decision was made to plant an organ at the base of our spine called Kundabuffer. And this organ had the capacity to keep us from seeing reality, keep us stuck in an illusory world. And that this organ, Kundabuffer, which is, Gurdjieff created his own language and vocabulary in Beelzebub's Tales, which is why some people consider the book unreadable. It is certainly not unreadable. As I often say, if you can go like that, you can read it. And in fact, Gurdjieff encouraged the reader to read the thing 3 times. And he invents his own vocabulary at many, many, many points in the book. Kundabuffer, I think we can reliably say, is a combination of Kundalini and buffer. And among the other things that the properties of this organ do is they cause us to view life with buffers or bumpers. And I ask you to listen to this very, very, very carefully, because this is part of the crux of man's sleep. When an individual does something that he feels is contrary to his nature, like lies or steals or cheats or breaks his word or insults a friend or doesn't pay back a debt or whatever it is, we're often stuck wondering, how could he have done that? That's so hypocritical. That's such bullshit. It's so contrary to what, Mike says he's all about or whatever. There's an inability for us to receive impressions contrary to our perception of our own character. There's an inability, a literal inability, for us to receive impressions contrary to our own self-image, our own sense of self. It doesn't enter, It doesn't enter. If I'm sure you've all had this experience. Maybe you see someone do a heinous act, an unprovoked act of violence, or whatever it is. And maybe you go up to that person and you say, why did you just do that? You will never get an answer. That's sleep. You will never get an answer. You will get some bullshit adjacency. Well, it's 12 o'clock. No, I didn't ask you if it's 12 o'clock. I asked you why you smacked somebody over the head with a baseball bat, unprovoked. Well, why don't you ask him, No, I'm not talking about him. That's our sleep. And so these buffers, which again, I've done poor justice to, these buffers keep us from actually letting in impressions contrary to our self-love, the wrong kind of self-love, self-adulation. And so this organ is planted into human beings, us 3-brained beings, and it keeps us from seeing reality. It makes us see reality upside down. It makes us receive pleasure from repeat impressions outside of ourselves. We didn't have phrases back then like doom scrolling, but I think you know what's being said. One time in the work, a teacher of mine who's now deceased asked me to name the properties of the organ Kundabuffer, and as I sort of stumbled through naming them, I said, and we human beings derive pleasure from complaining. And he said, only someone who really knows the work could make that kind of a mistake. That's a good mistake. It's not one of the properties, but as time passed, these breakaway bodies stabilized into their own orbit, and it was no longer necessary for the human race's existence to be dedicated to their maintenance. So these beings who engage in reciprocal maintenance with our solar system, they remove this organ. They remove this pernicious organ. But it turns out the effects of this organ had become crystallized in the individual. So even though the thing was removed, we're all still walking around in the same terrible state. And so the great being maintainers of the solar system, of the galaxy, sent teachers to help us out. Well, how did that work out? Buddha, Christ, some whose names we haven't heard, Ashiata Shamash, and other teachers who were supposed to help humanity straighten itself out. Well, they get killed, they get tormented. We hate them, you know. Do them in. What bullshit. Because the properties are so crystallized into our being that there is hatred, there is self-love of the wrong kind, there is, again, a tendency, in fact, a implacable quality that causes us to see reality upside down. And so stuck are we with this organ kunda buffer that we have war after war, then we overpopulate, then we have war after war again. In fact, a friend of mine in the Gurdjieff work years ago said to me that you could see this book, Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, All and Everything, as one great big parable against war. And I think that's true. And the view that Gurdjieff presents of humanity is a view that has no conventional hope. There is no conventional hope for fixing our situation. There is a possibility for the individual with a wish, with a particular deep, deep wish, a deeply sensitive, profoundly felt wish that there may be the possibility of seeing, there may be the possibility of self-observation, there may be the possibility of enduring one's contradictions, of feeling shame for my inability to act on my highest ideals, and not sublimating this shame through, again, what he called your evil inner God, and that is self-calming, self-calming. We don't necessarily want to get away from problems. We don't necessarily want to feel better, even though that's the urge. And of course, what do we do to feel better? You know, I reach for the weed, I reach for the beer, I reach for the phone. Hey, let's see, you know, what's up on Twitter, and does someone say something nice about me? I love him. Does something, you know, bad get said about me? I hate him. And these feelings, these rushes of life, they're very calming. They're very calming. It's exactly what we don't want. Exactly what we don't want. And there's a line in the Talmud. You know, the Talmud is so hard to speak of it as a single work. You know, I'm talking about thousands of rabbinic tracts where, you know, a master will have dialogues with his students. And some of it, it must be said, is very doctrinal, very local. I don't think has broadly applicable concerns. And I would say that about the liturgical and theological literature of most religions. Most of them, you know, really come down to a very, very small number of principles that we can define as universal, even though we can't do them. And then there's a lot of local concerns. But one of the statements I found in the Talmud that I think is universal is this. A master asks his students to name the signs of an evil man. And all the students have good answers. One might say a bad name, one might say a bad heart. And then a final student says, he who borrows and does not repay. And and the master said, I approve of your words because everybody else's words are folded into yours. He who borrows and does not repay. You know, what does that mean? What does that mean? There is this idea that we have to be cognizant of everything that has been given to us. And I think that one of the most pernicious things we do, and there is a self-calming element to it, as I was referencing earlier, is kind of an excessive complaining, a complaining about just everyday things. And I do it constantly. And I think this complaining is intended to dilute our feelings of anger or frustration. It seems to me there's so much in the way of fear for our own survival, our own well-being, even though, I mean, look, there are very serious problems in life, and there are health problems, and there are financial problems, and there are relationship problems, but look, I mean, we have running water, we have air conditioning, we have electricity, there aren't bombs falling on us. I mean, shame on me, a single day of my life that I complained because I didn't get, you know, extra napkins at Au Bon Pain or something. But that's my life, that's my life. And I grew up in a world, as I'm sure some of you did, where the topic of conversation was literally complaining all the time. You know, I'm from Queens, so this is to be expected, but I'm sure many of you have had this experience. And another, I think, deeply pernicious aspect of our lives that kind of reinforces sleep is excessive talking. This unbearable quality in human nature that says we have to always be talking. So you stand in an elevator, and people can't even be silent to one another, just in an elevator ride. They're humming, they're fidgeting, they're complaining, they're remarking to you on the weather, and this, that, and the other thing. And you know, Gurdjieff made the observation that when children are very, very young, we like to hear them talk, because it's cute, you know? So we bother the shit out of them to constantly be talking. And it creates these superfluous questions that do injustice to what a question really is. And this endless talking that we all engage in is a kind of waste activity that, again, keeps us asleep, keeps us from seeing, keeps us understanding. Anger and the misuses of anger, a problem for me is another aspect of this quality, this upside down way of viewing the world. Sometimes people in the work, and I'm no longer in a group associated with the Gurdjieff work, but I was for about 8 years, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. People in the work would sometimes say very, very simple things. So simple that it's easy to look past them and say, I know that, you know, I get that. But I don't know it, I don't get it. Because the profundity appears only in application, only in effort. And the effort will never be made. We all think, you know, if I said to you today, you can save your soul by every time you reach for a doorknob, open with your left hand. No one will do it. No one will do it. Everybody will say, yeah, right on. And then we'll step out and, oh, I'm using my left hand. And then you won't in 5 minutes. You won't do it. I won't do it. We won't do something even that small. It's a fact. And I remember one time when I was in a group associated with the work, we were at a cabin in the woods preparing some ornate meal. One of the wonderful aspects of the work that I feel I can share with you is that people, you know, anybody who comes to any spiritual group or meeting, they're very accustomed. We're all accustomed to being the wise owl in our group, you know. What does Sue think? What does Mike think? You know, we're the ones who, you know, we read and, you know, we've seen The Truman Show 5 times and we go to conferences on the Theosophy campus and we know what the fuck we're talking about. And within the work, you know, you might get put into a very, very unfamiliar situation like winter camping, awakened at 4 in the fucking morning to do some very, very disgusting task like clean a latrine. And yeah, you'll see in a real goddamn hurry how developed you are. You know, I mean, may the word enlightened or awakened or realized never pass our lips, you know, when you see yourself in that kind of a situation. But stuff has to be done sometimes in this world, you know, and a little story. Actually, I remember one time we were on one of these retreats and there were children there, and for some reason the garbage wasn't getting picked up. So another guy and I had to bag all the trash in these industrial trash bags, and we had to, I'm not proud of this, but we had to go and illegally dump it in the dumpsters of private businesses in town. And anybody who's ever run a business knows, you see somebody using your dumpster, you're coming out there with an aluminum baseball bat, and it's not to practice your swing. And I was not very happy about this. And the dude I was doing it with, he was like, oh, gee, I'm running for town supervisor in my town. I hope I don't get in trouble for this. And I was like, Peter, there's nothing I can do, you know. But there were children there, and it was a question of hygiene and sanitation, and we did it, you know. But you learn to evaluate yourself, you know, on a different scale, because, oh my God, if I hear anybody say non-attachment or non-identification or try to see the thoughts behind the thinker, it's like, oh, shut up, dude, you know. Let's go into the woods and try to, you know, cook couscous at 3 in the afternoon in the bitter fucking cold and see where the thoughts behind the thinker are there. You know, but these were also some of the happiest experiences of my life, some of the truly happiest experiences of my life. Needleman said to me, the ideal work setting is one where you can't wait to get the hell out of there, but you also want to stay for the rest of your life. And I know that experience. And, but you can't stay. You can't stay. You have to go back into life, unless you're a monk or a yogi and you really do retreat from life, which is honorable. But if you're like me, you can't stay, you know. And one time at this winter cabin, we were cooking and stuff, and there was an ice puddle that had formed outside the door of the kitchen. And every time somebody's trudging back in or out with a big pot of boiling water, I'm just like, oh, Jesus God, are they going to slip on that ice? And a friend of mine says, I am going to take a hatchet to that ice. And a very senior member of the work is walking in just at that moment. Her father, well, she knew Gurdjieff when she was a little girl, actually. And she said to him, anger solves nothing. And he and I both made eye contact, and we started cracking up, because he wasn't speaking out of anger. He was being very practical. If you know, smash up that ice, it'll be safer for people. But nonetheless, the statement was so valuable to me because it's so easy to look past. Of course, everyone in this room would agree. Anger solves nothing. We all agree. Every nation, every citizen, every soldier, every general agrees with that statement. And none of us abide it. None of us abide it. That anger solves nothing. I mean, to really try to live with that, what would it look like? You know, what would it look like? It's so simple, right? It sounds like a refrigerator magnet. But it's not. You know, it's truth. It's truth. And it's truth that we piss away because I tell myself, I get it, I get it. I don't find futility, you know, in the system, in Gurdjieff's outlook. I don't find futility. Because again, one of these things he says, and it's so simple that we're led astray by its very simplicity, because it sounds so obvious and so familiar. But one of the things that Gurdjieff remarks, and he talks about this in a very challenging and very good essay called The Material Question, about dealing with money in the world, The Material Question, in a book that he wrote called Meetings with Remarkable Men, which is probably his best known book. And in The Material Question, he talks about how he and some of his students around the First World War were living in and around Moscow. And when the Bolshevik Revolution, or the Bolshevik Civil War, as it's probably more accurately put, broke out, it's not as if everybody was like, hey, this is great. There were a lot of people who were very unhappy, very nervous, very upset, and who were frankly going to be targeted because maybe they were business owners, maybe they were so-called white Russians, came from a little bit more of like an aristocratic lineage. And so Gurdjieff and his circle said, we got to get out of here. And they made a perilously dangerous journey across Eurasia, and some of them wound up in Constantinople, some of them wound up in Istanbul. It was just undergoing change, right? That's right. And some of them wound up in Paris, some in other areas. And so Gurdjieff assembled a group of students in Paris, and they were trying to start up an institute, and perennial problem, they needed money. And so he planned a trip here to America, the land of dollar business, as he called it. He loved America, but boy, I mean, he thought this was the weirdest manifestation of Kundebuffer that the world had ever yet witnessed. He gave that to America, and he said, land of dollar business, bravo America, we go there, raise money. And so he got together a group of students. They were going to come here to the States to give talks and sacred dances, sacred movements that he taught, which you can see at the end of the movie version of Meetings with Remarkable Men. And one thing led to another, and he realized that so much money had been spent on this trip that they were absolutely destitute, and they had not a nickel to spare. And he said this was a profound crisis because there's simply no way 40 people can board a passenger ship, come to the United States, and not have one nickel to spare. There's going to be an emergency, somebody's going to get sick, somebody's going to lose something. It was a real crisis, and he didn't know what to do. And he said, I mean, here we were in between the wars in Paris. They're still recovering from the First World War. The economy is not great. He tried to earn money every way conceivable, and he kept hitting the wall, hitting the wall, hitting the wall. And he said, one day, I was sitting in my room, and I was pondering this, and I really felt that this was a disaster that could not be averted. I couldn't raise the money. We all did everything humanly possible, and I thought, this is it. We're going to cancel this trip, and this project is going to fail. And he said at that moment, his mother walked in the room. She had been with one of the groups of escapees from the Moscow area. And she and a group of people wound up in the Caucasus for a while. And through great effort and difficulty, he got her and this group into Paris. And he said that she walked into the room and she handed him a handkerchief. And she said, listen, I am so tired of carrying this thing around with me. I don't want it anymore. Take it. I want to unburden myself. And he opened up the hanky, and inside was this very, very valuable brooch with a very, very valuable gemstone. And he had forgotten that he had given this to his mother before they went off on their trip across Eurasia, because maybe it could be used to bribe someone to buy food, to bribe a border guard or something. And he said he forgot all about it. He said, I long since thought the thing had been bartered away. And he wrote, I was so happy that I literally could have gotten up and danced for joy. We were saved. The whole thing we were saved. And he said, I did see something lawful behind it. And I ask that you listen to this very, very carefully. He said, I did see something lawful behind it. And his sentence structure is such that I won't even try to paraphrase or reconstruct it. It might be seen as very obtuse, and his obtuseness was purposeful because, again, he was trying to rouse us from the experience of just roteness. And so he communicated that the rescue that he and everyone else experienced, the financial rescue that they experienced at what really seemed to be the very precipice, was the lawful result of unflinching perseverance. That was his exact phrase, unflinching perseverance. And it's not just, oh, so we should try hard. No. He once said, only super efforts count, only super efforts count. It's that unflinching determination to do something that brings to us some kind of reciprocal law. It seems to me that has an adjacency to the Talmudic passage I was referencing about the evil man being he who does not pay his debts. There is a debt for everything in life, a debt for everything in life. And it seems to me that what is being communicated is that there is a lawfulness to this. There's also accidents. Gurdjieff says a system, we all know that wonderful expression, there are no accidents. I'm not so sure. The founding of our planet in his cosmology is, in a sense, an accident. A comet strikes Earth, two pieces break off, one becomes the moon, one becomes Anulios, this unknown planet. We have to maintain the orbit of these things, and everything from there starts to really go downhill in a serious way. Well, that was an accident. That was an accident. So there are accidents in his system. So it's not as if, oh, I'll show unflinching perseverance. That means I'll absolutely recover from this disaster. Well, you sure as hell have a better chance, but there's still natural laws and forces that we have to live under, a vast, vast complexity of natural laws and forces. And we, three-brained beings, finding ourselves very distant from the center of creation, or what might be called nous in Hermeticism, the further you are from the center of creation, the more laws and forces you live under. And we live under a hell of a lot, a hell of a lot. But I don't want to leave the impression that there isn't something positive, that one can do within this framework of ideas. One of Gurdjieff's greatest students, P.D. Uspensky, eventually moved to the London area. And Uspensky was asked by a student to define a positive mental attitude. The 20th century was progressing, and we were men and women on the go, so we're ready to think and grow rich and be positive and so forth. So I'm surprised this happened in England and not in America. It must have been an American student visiting. But he asked Uspensky to talk about a positive mental attitude. And in essence, what Uspensky said was, a positive attitude, authentically defined, is not, hey, I'm a nice guy and I'm rosy and everything. It's viewing events based on their capacity for self-development. I'm paraphrasing, viewing events based on their capacity for self-development. That is an authentic positive attitude. And the idea being that something does come to the individual through these efforts. Again, simple things would get said sometimes in the work. The same woman who said anger solves nothing was in a group meeting, and there was a young man saying that he had been looking for a new apartment, and he had a real urgency to find an apartment. And he said, I looked, and everything went bust, and then eventually he found exactly what he needed. The price range, the geography, the look of the place. It was just what he wanted. And this teacher in the work said to him, it's interesting. I mean, sometimes, we look and we look and we look, and then we find just the thing we need. And that was it. That was all she said. And again, you could listen to that and be like, well, that's common sense, if there is such a thing, a term I also avoid using. I don't think there's anything like common sense. And it sounds so simple. You look and you look and you look, and then you find just what you need. But I believe that what she was saying was a variation on this idea of unflinching perseverance, and it brings something lawful to you. It brings something lawful to you. What if your unflinching perseverance is dedicated to making efforts at self-observation, making efforts at self-observation? Anybody who knows a stitch of Gurdjieff's work knows that his prescribed method is self-remembering, being aware, almost like an arrow that goes in both directions at once. I'm picking up this cup and I'm aware of it. And try it. Try it. Is it possible? Once a teacher of mine in the work said, the problem with New Age books is that they actually make the work seem possible. We have to try it, see. And we won't try it. We won't. We'll forget because he's telling us the truth. I want to close with a passage from Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson. It's the very last lines of the book. And I think they should be taken in an absolutely literal way. I think they're written very literally. The protagonist in the book, Beelzebub, is one of these figures who helps to engage in reciprocal maintenance, being maintenance of the cosmos. And due to some disobedience, he's exiled to an outer sphere of the cosmos very close to our own. So he's in this kind of shitty corner of the universe with us, living under all these different laws and forces. And then eventually, over the course of the book, through his own efforts, he is granted a reprieve. And much of the book is his dialogues with his grandson, Hussein. And by the end of the book, Hussein says, look, you know, you've been telling me the stories of these humans, these three-brained beings. And by the way, the notion that we're three-brained beings, physical, emotional, intellectual, Gurdjieff and our sleep also causes us to operate on all different tracks. So the intellect can't tell the body what to do, the body can't tell the emotions what to do. We say, you know, I know that eating something or drinking something is bad for me, but it doesn't matter because the body wants it, so the body just takes it. I say anger. Anger solves nothing. Well, it doesn't matter. That's the intellect saying that. The emotions rush in and take what they want, which might be anger. So we're in these different pieces as well. If we weren't, these brains, these thinking centers, emotional centers, physical centers would be functioning harmoniously, but they are not. So anyway, Hussein says to him, look, grandfather, after all that you told me, is there any prospect, is there any possibility for these three-brain beings? And this is how the book concludes. Beelzebub speaks. The soul means now, for the saving of the beings of the planet Earth, would be to implant again into their presences a new organ, an organ like Gurdjieff, but this time of such properties that every one of these unfortunates, during the process of existence, should constantly sense and be cognizant of the inevitability of his own death, as well as of the death of everyone upon whom his eyes or attention rests. Only such a sensation and such a cognizance can now destroy the egoism completely crystallized in them that has swallowed up the whole of their essence, and also that tendency to hate others which flows from it. The tendency, namely, which engenders all those mutual relationships existing there, which serve as the chief cause of all their abnormalities, unbecoming to three-brained beings and maleficent for themselves and for the whole of the universe. So, one of the properties of the organ Gurdjieff is that it causes the individual to forget his or her own mortality. And it's kind of interesting, forgive the digression, but it's kind of interesting that Barbie's journey occurs when her own mortality dawns on her. And it's only perhaps very late in the game of life that we realize in a visceral sense, our mortality. And even then, so much comes to take, to self-calm us, you know, to take us away from that perspective. But what the author is saying in the book, and what the protagonist Beelzebub is saying in the book, is that perhaps the last greatest hope for the human situation is for all of us not only to remember our own death, but to remember the impending death of everyone upon whom we set eyes, everyone upon whom we look. So I ask us, I ask myself not to, it's not really about some artificial adoption of a self-denial. There's nothing like that in Gurdjieff's work. Like Madame Blavatsky, he smoked, he drank, he yelled at people. You know, he lived life. You know, he enjoyed life. There wasn't an ascetic quality exactly, but there was a quality in which the frictions of life, the problems in life, were not something that were to be escaped or run away from. They were opportunities for what Beelzebub calls being a parked log duty, which is to say conscious suffering, conscious labors, which maintains the cosmos, which is proper to an individual life, and as I see it, if I can put it in these terms, involves a continual and ever radiating awareness of the need to pay our debts. So I thank you all very much for this opportunity. I'm very grateful to speak to you about these ideas, and we have a few minutes. We have about 10 minutes or so. I would be very happy to take any questions or comments or observations.
You got it. Any questions? Kunda Bafa. It's not a Tuma, it's Kunda Bafa.
Well, thanks, Mitch. That was very enjoyable. You talked a lot about Gurdjieff's attitude toward money, and you did also allude to Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, which I know is a book that's influenced you a great deal. How do you relate those two approaches?
I appreciate that question enormously, because although I was referencing Think and Grow Rich in a slightly glib way, it's a central text in my life. I read the thing all the time. I'll probably read it again before this year is out. And it's a funny thing, isn't it? Because Napoleon Hill, fraud, trickster, gauche title. Oh God, all those dumb New Agers reading that book, and there's Horowitz telling them they're doing the right thing. It seems to me that speaking from Gurdjieff's perspective, the possession of resources in life is absolutely vital, absolutely vital. And I know there's one of Gurdjieff's books, it may be called Life is Real Only Then When I Am, where he wrote something that I first thought was very crass and I was very bothered by, and then it was only years later that I came to realize how right he was. He said that he had retired for the time being from some of his labors in Paris. He closed down his school there, the Prairie. The expense, the difficulties, the this, the that, the other thing made it necessary. And he needed to rest. He had been working on this book, and he said people would send him letters all the time asking him advice. And he said he would open up the letter, and if there was money inside, he'd respond to the recipient, and if there wasn't money inside, he'd throw the letter away. And I thought, that's so crass, that's so cruel. Wrong, wrong, wrong. The crassness and the cruelty comes from the person who doesn't respect the time of the individual whose advice they're asking. I'm blown away by this notion that people are confused as to whether somebody should charge for a conference on Gnosticism. Just give it away. It's ridiculous. It's not how life functions. And it shows such a disrespect for the traditions that we say we care about. It shows such a disrespect. You say the name of the Maharishi and everybody says, oh, that's the guy who charges $500 to get your mantra. Well, shit, I spend $500 on snacks, at a boxing match. And I mean this. And people complain about that, of all things, like, there's the problem, So Gurdjieff took very seriously the absolute need for resources and to not be embarrassed about it. And quite frankly, I find ideas in Hill's work that are so practical, are so good. He talks about an idea of sex transmutation, directing the sexual urge towards some maybe intellectual task. And so I think there's great value in the book. I think that it's one of the greatest titles of all time, although it has a P.T. Barnum quality to it. Some people think it's one of the worst titles of all time, but it certainly knows how to meet people where they live. I'm reminded of a story. There was a great teacher in the work, John Pentland, who was a direct student of Gurdjieff's, and his funeral was held in a Christian church, and a family member of his was saying to me that so-and-so was being invited up on the altar to read from Beelzebub's tales to his grandson, and there was this kind of shocked hush in the church. And my friend said, couldn't he have just called it All and Everything? Does it have to, what's in a name? What's in a name? But anyway, I view the book, Think and Grow Rich, as effective, and that's why I read it. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about the robots part of the book?
Yes, thank you. That was Miguel's. Miguel put in the word robot. It was a term that Gurdjieff probably had used, but more frequently he would speak of automaton.
I should have used Mr. Roboto.
Mr. Roboto? Was that? Oh, the sticks argument we're tabling.
It's going.
We're not mature enough for the sticks argument. And it's very interesting, this notion of being an automaton. It's so true. It's so true. Think of it. I remember once saying to somebody in the work, something happens to me, and I do one of like 20 responses, and it's horrible. It's horrible. That's my life. And I think of when I was a kid, I don't know if they still make these, but they used to make these pull-string dolls, and they would have 5 different expressions. My name is Talking Tina, and I'm going to kill you. That's the Twilight Zone. But I do believe that that's our human situation. I really, really do, and I appreciate that question. I really do. It's horrible. It's horrible. And the gravest difficulty is to see it in myself. I remember, and I'm sure we've all had these experiences, but again, the grave difficulty is seeing it in myself. I remember I was out to a meal with an elderly relative, and the food wasn't being served quickly enough, and so she made a remark, and I was so depressed because I thought to myself, oh my God, this person is well past 80, and I've been hearing this since I'm old enough to remember. And we are automatons. But the challenge, of course, is seeing that in me.
Yeah. All right. Domo arigato.
So I was wondering, the idea in Gurdjieff where we are supposedly anchoring these outer planets, is there a similarity in the work, or do you find that the people who are willing to do the work are anchoring kind of the rest of the population? I'm thinking of there's a Maori proverb from New Zealand that says there are 2 kinds of people in the world, those who are asleep and those who are awake. And then they have prophecy that says if enough people can hold a light, that we can interconnect and kind of maintain the planet. Is there any sort of something like that in the work?
I agree with that proverb. I think those of us who are asleep are in the vast, vast, vast majority. I think there is an ideal in the work that it's being done for the sake of the work, that it's being done for the sake of keeping that effort going. But there's also, as is taught in Gurdjieff's system, a descent of things. There are, and it's not negative, but there's the forces that compose life are active, passive, and reconciling. And it's not like one is better than the other. We're entrained to think active is better. It's not the case. But the work and all religions would have to be seen as a kind of passive descent of ideas. For example, as someone once put it to me, if there weren't a passive descent of ideas, there would be no Buddhism. We had Buddha, and then we had Buddhism, and so it's lawful. It's entirely necessary. So I think that there's a cognizance in the ideal that yes, the work is being perpetuated for the effort to be there, so that a person could find a copy of this book and read this book and do and attempt other things. But that the descent of the ideas, is also going on as well. Like there's probably some people who are going to see this talk, maybe it'll be up later on YouTube, and say, who's Horowitz to be discussing these ideas? Well, there's laws a hell of a lot bigger than whatever it is I get up in the morning wanting to attempt, that are behind that. So I would say in the affirmative to your question, yes, I think that ideal exists within the work, yes. Chris?
I was struck by how similar this cosmology you discussed was to Velikovsky, and I was wondering whether there was any kind of contact or influence or anything of that nature.
I don't know that there was any direct contact, but certainly, he and Gurdjieff were rough contemporaries of one another. There was some overlap there. And I think that there is, Gurdjieff is often called Greek Armenian. He's called Russian. Certainly, he spent a lot of his life within the sphere of Russia, leaving only when the revolution made it necessary. And I think there's a cosmism, citing Velikovsky's philosophy, an attitude within modern Russian philosophy that there is scale. We all occupy a place in these cosmos, and that it really matters. It's not just, oh, I happen to live in this rock that rotates the sun, but that there is scale, there is interconnection. And Velikovsky said, Earth is the cradle of humanity, but humanity cannot remain in the cradle forever. And so I suspect, and Gurdjieff probably drew upon many, many different sources for his ideas, and he was very secretive about it. He spoke of there being a brotherhood in Central Asia, maybe Afghanistan, where he learned some things. Some people speculate that was a Sufi brotherhood. Next thing you know, Gurdjieff is being called a Sufi. He never identified himself as a Sufi. But I do believe he was drinking from a lot of different wells. And I believe, just as you had, Blavatsky, Gurdjieff, you had a cosmic attitude. In America, we have transcendentalism, let's say. And in Russia, they have cosmism, the belief that there is a total interconnectedness in the cosmos, which I think probably is, among the reasons why they beat us to space. It's sort of a quotidian thing to say, but there it is,
Can I ask just a follow-up? Real quick, I'm sorry. I was always just really curious about the connection with J.G. Bennett, and I never really understood the lineage there. Could you just explain that real briefly?
Sure. Bennett was an Englishman who was a student of Gurdjieff's work, and Bennett, too, was a man who drank from many, many different wells. So he became involved with Idris Shah, who was the first person who started referencing Gurdjieff as a Sufi. And it may be true. It's not exactly. It's certainly something he never said. He said he was a Christian. But I think that Bennett drank from many, many different wells, and it wove in and out of the cultures emergent from, I guess, this wave of spiritual search that followed first the death of Blavatsky, then the death of Gurdjieff. And I think he was a very great man who maintained relations with people in the work up until his death, but he was very determined to be an absolute free agent who went around in different spiritual communities and drank from their waters. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Naja?
Thank you so much for that talk, Mitch. That was really a valuable perspective. And it brought up something that I think about a lot, and that I deal with a lot of human beings that have real problems, so that idea of pragmatism. But I was wondering what you would think about that kind of oppositional view where we're considered evil if we don't pay our debt, and that we have these debts to pay. But then there's this idea of ablution or mercy, and that Jesus, who we know that wasn't his name because of the letter J, but that was from yesterday, but that he was killed over usury debt, right? And that was his whole beingness, was to project that I'm wiping out everyone's debt. And then we get these esoteric symbols of the scales, and that we see throughout ancient Egypt, and how there is no debt to pay if there's mercy and grace and forgiveness. I know that it's kind of like a squabbling point between Christians and Judaism. I don't think for a good reason, because of course of Yom Kippur, is like they have that idea of ablution as well, and it's not an us versus them kind of thing. But I was wondering how that might play into that kind of pay your debts, or is ablution or forgiveness of debt something, I know it's like idealistic, because everyone wants forgiveness, but then when you have to forgive someone that owes you money, doing the thing is actually really difficult. So I was wondering what your thoughts are and how to balance that debt payment versus grace.
I think that with regard to, Gurdjieff did describe himself as a Christian, and he did at one point describe the work as esoteric Christianity, although a teacher said to me, he was addressing a Western audience, and if he was in India, he might have said it's esoteric Hinduism or esoteric Buddhism. He wasn't, creating teams, or anything. I think his view of forgiveness, was that we are so topsy-turvy, we are so upside down that we're not even at the point where we can exercise or engage in that. But I do remember that there was a teacher in the work who was very widely considered obnoxious and inappropriate. Very smart man, very capable man, but obnoxious. And he had been effectively kind of kicked out. And then a teacher of mine in the work invited him back in for a particular weekend, and I hated him. I was like, who the fuck is this guy? He's such an asshole. And yet a friend of mine in the work, older guy, older than me, said, look, of my teacher, he said, I'll never forget these words, and I don't mind speaking them, because I think they should be spoken. He said, John does not crucify people. John does not crucify people. Yeah. I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. Yeah, one more question. I think, was the camera Heidi in the chat had a good question about, did Gurdjieff have a Sophia figure? But we can, is there any other questions? And we can get back. Okay. Did Gurdjieff have a Sophia figure, a divine feminine in his life?
He did say of Madame Blavatsky, he said, she was almost right. She was almost right, which from Gurdjieff is high praise. And then there was another story.
It's better, men are never right.
Miguel's going to insult a different group with each. No. And just another quickie that I'll end on. Uspensky was living in London towards the end of his life, and there was a lady in New York who owned a famous bookstore now closed called the Gotham Book Mart, and she sent Uspensky a copy of Volume 1 of Henry Steele Olcott's memoirs, Old Diary Leaves, and Uspensky sent it back to her, and he said, thank you very much. I already got a copy of this book. I read it, and to me, it is the most interesting book in the world, because whatever people can say, Olcott did not lie. And that was his judgment on the book. I haven't exactly answered the question. Did he have a Sophia figure? I think that I never heard him precisely speak in those terms, but I know that he was deeply venerative of all religions, and he profoundly encouraged that, and he meant it, and on that, he and Madame Blavatsky would have been in complete harmony.
Great. Well, thank you, Mitch, and again, for the panel, more questions if you want.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you, man.
All right, we will start in a couple minutes for the next one. 5 minutes, guys.